Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. Just wanted to give a shout out to anybody that attended the virtual Uplink conference last weekend. That was a lot of fun and I saw a bunch of you, so thank you very much. That was really awesome. Hopefully you had a good time. I certainly did. But anyway, let's jump into the Q&As. First up, over on Floatplane, Buster D says, thanks for your suggestion of using an old SNES for practicing decapping. I actually found a Super Famicom in a junk bin here in Tokyo for around $5, but when I opened it up, it wasn't a one-chip, and the only problem seemed to be a bit of dust and corrosion on the cartridge slot. It seemed to work fine after that was cleaned up, so maybe I'll start with something I know is broken, like the PS1 7000 that won't output any video. Can maybe try practicing stuff like drag soldering as well. So, I mean, that's probably a good idea, but if you're going to just straight up practice soldering, pick up something that's broken, that can't be fixed. Just find something in a garbage bin or a piece of electronics that you wouldn't replace anyway, something that's only a few dollars and you would throw out, and try practicing on that. But the Super Nintendo, the only tricky thing is trying to get the surface mount capacitors up, and it's only tricky if you've never done it before or if you don't have the right tools. I use these cheap $5 soldering tweezers that are terrible, but I don't use them very often, so I'll just sit there and deal with the 10 minutes it takes to remove those, as opposed to buying the expensive ones and just grabbing them, really nice like you're supposed to. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm with you on that, but at some point you definitely would also want to try to practice on something that you could make sure is working before and after. So practice on something dead that's not even worth fixing, then maybe move on to the Super Nintendo, and then maybe go on to the PS1, which is usually a little bit tighter to work on. Buster D also says, another thing I was thinking of doing was to test if any of the repro or third-party cartridges I have use 3.3 volts or 5 volts. Not too worried about damaging my systems, but I figured doing this would be a fun way to get to know my oscilloscope better. My problem is that I'm having trouble finding specific info on testing. Found Renee's video on the more technical video on testing EverDrives, but probably not experienced to know how to replicate his testing. Any quick suggestions? Well, for that, you could read the part numbers off the chips and try to do it that way to figure out what voltage it's running on. You probably should be able to use a multimeter for that as well, depending on the situation. It should just be straight up and you wouldn't need to use your scope for that. Scopes are probably easier to just follow the video Steve and I did, which is very long, but we also do a quick start at the beginning and a quick recap at the end, but that's much easier because you don't have to deal with probes. You could just buy those adapters that we showed and plug your SCART cable right into it. And just if anybody doesn't know that, I'm certainly not going to go through the story again, but the whole improper voltage thing on EverDrives, it was one of these things where it's like, the EverDrive's probably not going to last as long as it could have, and it probably won't hurt your console, so whatever. The real problem was the specific ones that were the worst were the NES, 101 multi-carts. Those were bad. Those were like, don't ever put those in your console. And the Neo Geo 161 and ones, they've gotten better. I guess the company listened and have fixed some of the voltage issues. They're still not great, but I'm still kind of convinced that a few friends of mine broke their MVSs because they used those things in there. That's, I haven't proven that with science yet, but there's just too much of a coincidence and stuff going on there. So those are the only ones to actually stay away from. And I don't, in the new Neo Geo ones, or if you do the fix to the old one, it's not going to kill your board, but it's just, those are the ones to worry about, whereas I would never worry about EverDrives. I just, and I don't think I've been able to talk about this in a while, so I'll add this boring little tidbit in there. When Renee and I did that spoof video, which I've since made put unlisted, it was satire. We were being silly. And at the time, I only had like 1,000 followers. So I felt like everybody got the joke. But as time went on and that thing started to escalate, I think people thought we were really seriously saying EverDrives will explode your consoles. So my apologies. I didn't have a big enough following that I thought it would make a difference, and apparently it did. And, I'm always super conscious of the fact that I am so lucky that I have listeners all over the world, and if English isn't your first language, picking up on satire like that might be a little bit tricky. I know for me it absolutely would. When I was all over the top and yelling and stuff, I'm sure that part, anybody would be able to tell, even if it was muted, that I was just being silly. But some of the stuff that we talked about, I just wanted to make sure I put that into perspective for everybody. And I guess this was the first time I had a chance to mention it. So good luck with your soldering. And yeah, definitely maybe check video voltages on the scope, even just sync, as it's probably going to be the easiest way to start. Next, Rolf says, thanks for the comments about the component video case, but they should have been a bit more clear with the Smash situation. I understand that GameCube or Wii to the CRT is zero lag. However, due to the pandemic, everyone has to play online. And recently somebody created a better online solution that even has matchmaking for Smash Melee. It's still emulated, but way better than normal net play. You could check it out at a link here, and they were hoping to find a way that other players that are way less tech savvy could use it to connect their PCs to where they would play Smash on a CRT for a less lag experience. So what I wanted to properly know is if there's any other PC to 15 kHz CRT solution out there besides CRT MU driver and the GBSC. And for the best way for non-tech savvy players would be something that is HDMI to composite or component. But since HDMI pretty much only carries signals that are 480p, the 8 milliseconds of downscaling lag looks unavoidable. Also, the plan would be around spending less than buying a high refresh rate and low input lag gaming monitor. I'm closely following the GBSC project, but I feel a bit concerned that it might be upwards of 100 for such a niche solution compared to just getting a proper monitor for 200. So that's the kind of perspective I always try to tell people when talking about the GBS control. I love it. I have nothing but good things to say, but there were a couple overzealous fans of it that kind of said, like, this is the perfect thing for everyone, whereas you just have a perfectly good explanation. And to be honest, I have an HP monitor it's okay. I don't love it, but it's got less than 2 milliseconds of lag. So I would absolutely, without a doubt, recommend that unless you really want a game on a CRT, just use that. There is no possible way that any professional gamer is ever going to notice the difference with 2 milliseconds of lag. It's impossible. There's no way. The way your moves are timed and the way the controller inputs are read, the chance of somebody missing a move because of 2 milliseconds of lag is so unrealistic. So yeah, I mean, and my monitor brand new was 125, and that was 3 or 4 years ago, which means you could probably pick up one of these monitors used on eBay or on Craigslist or something for half of that. So, you know, while I tried to answer your downscaling question last time, this time, now that I know the whole situation, I would just, in that case, recommend getting a cheap used monitor with HDMI or DVI input that has really low latency. So I would try to pick one of those out instead, unless you really love the look of the CRT, but you absolutely nailed it. GBSC plus something that does, component to composite or RGB to composite, that's going to be over $100 just to get from HDMI to composite video onto a CRT, which, if you're really just looking for a low lag solution, you could spend $50 and get a used monitor that maybe the backlight isn't so bright, or maybe the screen color is a hair off, but it was an expensive monitor before and now it's still zero, almost zero lag. So that's kind of where the direction I would point you in for that. But thanks for clarifying. That's a pretty interesting setup, and it makes total sense about the net play. Now over to Patreon, and I'm going to be starting with the newest question just because I'm going to try to do these before it gets super hot in here. Also, I just read through this question, and a giant loud siren came by and cut me off right at the end. So I'll skip reading through again and just say that Steadicam Scott wants to know about downscaling consoles. They have everything hooked up via component video through a G-Comp switch, and one of them's going directly into a flat panel, or I guess through a scaler, and the other one is going into a consumer-grade TV. And they want to know how to downscale the consoles that aren't able to do 15 kilohertz. And it sounds like in your scenario, the best bet is probably buying a GBS control or buying a GBS 8200 and then doing the mod yourself. The only issue is, at the moment, it only supports 480p to 240p. It does work with 480i to 240p, but that's still kind of a beta feature. And there's no plans yet for 720 or 1080p to downscale. It's an open source project, which means hopefully somebody will take it upon themselves to look at the code and try to add that. Excuse me. But at the moment, I'm not sure what's out there to go directly from 720p. Now, I think all modern consoles can be set to 720 as opposed to 1080, but I don't know if anything can go down from that. I haven't started the downscaling video yet, but I will be testing the Choreo box, the DVDO VP50, but those are very expensive solutions or kind of complicated. So if you could find one for a price that you're happy with, or if you know, like on the DVDO side, I've heard it can downscale. I haven't tested it myself, but I also know that it's an amazing deinterlacer. So if you were going to buy that for multiple uses, cool. But if you're just looking for a deinterlacer, I would definitely get the GBS control either pre-installed or do it yourself, or have somebody do it, I guess. And I would just do component video in to component video out. Remember that you have to change your resistor if you want proper levels of component video output, and that should take care of everything. And as long as you connect to it with your app, you could always just leave that plugged into your consumer CRT. So, G-Comp switch to GBS to consumer CRT, and then just fire open your app on your phone or the website on your phone. Just save it as a link and leave it in pass-through mode unless you need to do downscaling. And then before you turn your CRT on, turn on your console, set it to 480p, and then set it to downscale mode, so you don't ever actually have to switch cables. So overall, I think this is like the perfect use for the GBS software, or hardware software combo. So I think that's going to be your best solution. But let me know if you have any other questions. And I have no idea when I'm going to get to the downscaling video. I'm kind of booked for the next month or so, and other stuff I'd kind of promised people that have to go along with product launches and stuff like that. So I'll get to and I even borrowed a bunch of equipment to do the downscaling video. So I feel like I'm letting my friend down just leaving their equipment in a bag, but I'll get to it as soon as I can, but I can't imagine it's going to be less than a month. Normal Guy wants to know, are there any websites with fan translations all in one place? Also, is there a group to support towards more fan translations? Just genuinely curious about the translation scene for retro video games. I always go to romhacking.net for mine. I don't know if there's one central location other than that, but it's certainly a good place to start. If anybody knows of any others, please let me know. And as far as where to support, I would just check to see if any of check your favorite games that have been translated, check who did it, and see if they have a Patreon or something like that. That stuff, I don't think people realize how much work that actually takes. Or maybe, maybe you do because you're already into it. But I think your average gamer, when they hear fan translation, they think, oh, cool. And when you think of games like Afterburner, I always use that as an example. Like, that's not too much text, but it's still awesome that people took the time to do it. But when you're talking about some of these role-playing games, I mean, this is just like months of people's lives to make this happen. So I agree. It would be cool if there was an easy way to support, but I think you're just going to have to do it on a case-by-case basis. But it was a really great question. ThunderZap7 had a question about Game Boy interface, and I'm not sure that I understand it fully. So I guess they're getting a flicker after extended gameplay. So after about 40 minutes, they say a noticeable flicker appears on their monitor. So what exactly do you mean by flicker? Is it like an interlacing flashing on the screen, or is it just like a screen tear that happens every 40 minutes and then like every couple of minutes after that or something like that? I think that would be the first question that I'd need to know. And also you mentioned something about image retention. I've never worried about image retention with Game Boy interface unless you're accidentally using it in an interlaced mode. And even then, interlaced flicker on flat panels goes away pretty quick. I've heard reports of otherwise, but I've never seen it in person, so I'm not really sure about that. So I guess I can't really answer your question properly because I don't really understand it. However, Extrems, the creator of that, has a thread over on the GC Forever forums. It's linked on the GBI page, and it's like one of the first things that comes up when you Google it. So it might actually be better just to go directly to the source and check out maybe what Extrems has to say about it. But if it's an actual flicker something might be up with some kind of configuration settings, but if it's a screen tear, it shouldn't be that big a deal. So sorry I can't really answer it, but hopefully I could point you in the right direction. Marco Vizzini also has questions about downscaling, which is cool because I guess that means that if I ever put that video out, it's going to get more than 2 views. But Marco has an interesting setup. He's got an Extron XI and an RGB interface combo for downscaling anything HD to 240p. But how it works is it takes anything HD progressive and downscales it to 480i, then the Extron RGB interface deinterlaces it to 240p, but with the loss of sharpness. So that's an interesting setup, and to be honest, I don't know if that's the most efficient way of doing it, because deinterlacing 480i, whether it's to 240p or up to 480p, is way harder than upscaling and downscaling, and adds a lot more lag. Also, I've never tested the lag on an Extron XI, but I have tested it on other video interfaces, and it's usually a lot because it's not designed for gaming. They're designed to just distribute video and stuff like that. So I'll answer your questions, but I also want to start out by saying it might be much easier for you to change up the way your setup works. Even if you use the Extron XI to go down to 480p, and then use a different device to go from 480p to 240p. But question 1, does the GBS output 240p that an upscaler like the FrameMeister can work with, because the sync with the Extron downscaled 240p doesn't work on the FrameMeister, just the BVM? So yeah, it should be fine. I think the FrameMeister's probably getting weird because of so many things in the chain messing with the signal. However, if you're doing some kind of downscaling like that, it might be much better to split that signal before you downscale it. So I'm just assuming the reason you would want to do something like this is for streaming, because obviously if you're just trying to get a 480p or 720p image on your flat panel, you would just use it in 480p or 720. But I imagine you're probably doing something like streaming on a CRT and then also or playing on a CRT and streaming on your favorite service. And if that's the case, then I would split that signal first, take whatever's coming out of the console and put that directly into your capture card, and then just let everything else go to the CRT. Same thing, I guess, if you needed, even if you needed scan lines, just get it to 480p and stick it into the FrameMeister or the OSSC and kind of go from there. So I would kind of I wouldn't even worry about that at all unless you absolutely had to scale the image afterwards. Also, the question you asked, what's the sharpness like when downscaled? So going from 480p to 240p should be pretty much identical on a CRT. I will do the full analysis. I'll do captures and put them side by side. But the entire purpose of downscaling is to get an image working on a CRT that's normally too high of a frequency to work on a CRT. And in the case of, having an electron gun fire a beam of light across a pane of glass, in my experience, I haven't really seen too much of a difference. I guess if you have a BVM and it's perfectly calibrated and you take still pictures to compare, you might be able to see a difference. If you have a good eye for sharpness, you might. But in my experience so far, just being able to play this stuff on a CRT, it's more than good enough. Of course, I'll dig deep into that into the video, but if you're just gaming on taking a 480p output from a modern console and sticking that on a BVM, downscaling it, I think you're going to be happy with the results either way. But once again, I would not go down to 480i and then from 480i to 240p. I would keep, if you have a progressive scan image, I would keep it progressive the entire way, both for sharpness and for lag. Brento says they have 2 TVs at the moment, a Sony PVM that's 20 inches. It unfortunately sits in a closet because the screen size is a bit too small for my liking. I play on the 32-inch D-series I've got in my living room, but the geometry has bugged me for a while, especially when scrolling. I imagine that's probably a 32-inch JVC D-series, but let me continue with the question. The Neo Geo on the PVM is perfect, which is why I keep it around. However, the new TVs that this fellow is building are very, very intriguing, and I might even cough up the dough to buy one. I love the idea that they're new and may last a long time. What I want is sort of a perfect mix between my D-series and PVM. It seems like he does 27-inch TVs, which is cool, perfect size, and line count similar to the D series, but wanted to ask if I knew anything about the Neo Geo. Would the geometry be more like that of a PVM or a consumer grade set? Or I guess maybe you're not talking about Neo Geo, maybe you're talking about one of the models of TVs or something. But so I do have a few thoughts on this. I haven't seen the Dottronics monitors in person. I'm trying to work with my friend who introduced me to Kurt to try and find some place that would let me in to just mess with it for a little while. And there's also a good chance that when I see it, I'm only going to be able to see composite video input, which shouldn't make a difference in geometry. However, I get the idea that the monitor is going to be exactly like a really high-end consumer TV with excellent geometry. I think it might actually be what you're asking for. So you're not going to get the sharpness or line count of a PVM, and it's also not going to be the same look, as you will already know, shadow mask versus aperture grill, Trinitron versus non-Trinitron. But if you're willing to cough up the $3,000, it absolutely should do what you want. But I can't vouch for it yet, and I don't want to give people advice on that much money and spending that much money without seeing it. But by all specs, it should. And I know Kurt said he was working on trying to come up with a retro gaming SKU and trying to figure out what monitors he can do RGB on and all that other stuff, true RGB input. So I'm not sure if you get a chance to figure that out, but hopefully he'd be able to get a SKU prepared and people could just order that directly if they want a retro gaming monitor. And at least one friend of mine is definitely without a doubt going to buy one. So worst comes to worst, I'd probably be able to have that shipped somewhere close enough to me where I can go see it and do a little, even if it's just a quick video on it, even if it's like an Instagram video and it's not a full production YouTube video or something, I'd still be able to check it out. But I actually also agree with your setup. When I had the 32-inch JVC D series, I had to put it in storage because there's no room, and that was what I normally gamed on, just because I loved the look of a giant CRT. The geometry did bug me, absolutely. I've never had a CRT with perfect geometry, but it was definitely worse than the professional grade monitors. And Jose even said he was going to come over and try to mess with it with me, but we never had time before I had to get it out of here. So I don't know how good you could get that, but whenever I want that, super, elitist, perfect BVM look, that's kind of why I have my smaller 20 inches on rolling carts. But I only have one in here now, but when I had a few of them, they each were on their own cart. And that way, every time I was playing on that one, I would just pull it closer to my couch, which seems like a dumb solution, but it actually worked pretty well. So, to answer all of your questions, I will try to look or to get a hands-on experience with the Dottronics monitors. It should do what you're looking to do, but I can't vouch for it until I see it personally. I like your setup, but maybe try a rolling cart and pulling the PVM closer or something like that. And also, thank you very much for all the kind words. I really appreciate it. Focus says they're getting a Haas Supergun, which outputs via an 8-pin mini-DIN. I'm building a chest to place this in and basically treat it in the arcade boards as a console. One fun idea I had was to try and get analog and digital video out of it simultaneously. I was wondering if you knew of an 8-pin mini-DIN splitter. I know you have the Shiny Bow SCART splitter on your site, but I'd like to avoid as many conversions as I can. One output would go to an 8-pin mini-DIN port on the back of the Consolized chest, while the other goes to potentially a 2X SCART. So I think what I would probably do is I think I would look at buying one of Voltar's SCART splitter thingies. And, you could build one. He put the design out there for free. Some people were building them. I want to make sure I word this correctly because I want to be respectful. In the terms of a video capture device, I don't like this one. I like the other one better for a million stupid reasons that I'm not going to bore everybody with. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with this at all. And it does have, one input, one SCART input, one SCART output, and one DVI analog output. But if you're having one of these built for you, you could just leave the SCART connectors and the DVI connector off and you could just wire this directly. So buy yourself any 8-pin cable, essentially, cut the end off and wire it directly to the input ports of this. And now you have a safe output. You could even have the toggleable low pass filter, and you could go to wire that both 1 to a 2x SCART. So I guess maybe put the SCART output on that one, and these should be out, eventually. Everything going on in the world slowed it down, but you could certainly do the output side to this and then to the 2x SCART like this. So you could kind of have a chain like this, and then manually solder the other output to whatever kind of DIN port you want on the back. So on the inside you would have this setup, but on the outside you would, you could probably even do an HDMI super short extension cable, so plug to receptacle, so you could mount that on the box. So that's what you'd see on the inside, but on the outside essentially all you would see is like an 8-pin mini DIN and an HDMI port. You could certainly pull something off like that. If you're into building devices, or if you know people that are, essentially all you would really need is any kind of amp device that, like the THS chips, that could split the signal properly. And that's really all you would have to worry about. I would also double check and see if there's any hats. I'm not sure what you would call them, but any of the things that you stick on top of the HAS that allow for dual output, because I think I remember a component video output adapter for it, which would mean that you wouldn't need anything custom like this at all. You would just, instead of getting the 2x SCART, you'd get the 2x Pro, do component video into that, and then leave the 8-pin mini DIN, just have an extension cable built. Maybe Retro Access would even make one for you, so you could break that out to the outside. That might actually be the easiest thing overall. And if you don't know how to solder small SMD stuff like this, it might actually be cheaper, because then you wouldn't have to pay anybody to make it for you. You would just buy the component video output solution for it, or whatever other output. S-Video might be okay as well. So I would because you're building your own thing, I would think out of the box a little bit and try to approach it from solutions like that. But overall, it sounds like a cool idea. Obed Samuel wants to know if I'll be covering the PS1 Digital anytime soon. It would be great to see this against an OSSC, which is what I currently use. Very intrigued by this. So yes, absolutely. I'm planning on having my video prepared to launch on the day that the pre-orders launch, or within a few days of it if I run behind like I often do these days. But without looking at the side-by-side comparisons yet, I haven't done the capture part of the video, so I can't give you an exact answer, but I could give you a guess. Well, first of all, yes, I will be showing the comparison, but here, my guess is that if you take the time to do an optimal profile for the PS1 on the OSSC, and you dial in phase, and you make sure everything's lined up, that it's going to be very, very close to the PS1 Digital. However, there's a few options of the PS1 Digital that you might like, but you'd never have to mess with settings. You never have to dial in phase. You never have to add profiles. You never have to worry about any of that. So basic ease of use is going to be way better. And on top of that, if you just use your OSSC in generic mode, or I guess even any of the RetroTINK products or Rad2X, you are going to notice a difference in sharpness, especially if you're going to like a 4K TV or something like that. So, and once again, there's a few other options about it that may or may not apply to your setup that I'll cover in the video. So overall, if you're somebody who takes the time, like if you've already gone through all of the PS1 profiles, because there's different resolutions and stuff that it supports, and you've already set phase for all of them, and every game that you own, like, all right, well, this one's in this resolution, this one's in that one, I'm not really sure if it's going to be a giant difference. Anytime analog to digital is always going to be noisier than digital to digital. It's just a matter of how noisy can you see it or not, etc. So, if you take the time to do all that craziness, I don't know if this is going to be a giant upgrade, but for your average person that just wants to plug in a device and get it on their TV, this is going to be a noticeable difference, with some cool features. So while I will obviously be covering it in detail, I just wanted to give you like a sneak peek answer of what to expect. Gavin K says they recently bought an Extron Crosspoint 300 off of eBay, and it looked to be in really great shape. However, when it arrived, the unit will power on, but they can't seem to get any signal out of it. As far as troubleshooting so far, they've tried most of the inputs, different signals like RGB or component, reset, hard reset, and opening up the case and reseating all the ribbon cables. They're in talks with the seller to get a refund, but they just wanted to see if I have any other troubleshooting tips or experience with this issue. No, not at all. However, all electronics devices will eventually have components that fail, and if something is if something's dropped hard in shipping, there's potential for the board cracking. There's potential for components to go popping off if they're old and the solder joints are getting old and cracked. So it could be as easy as if you open it up and look at every component, you could find one that's broken. But while that's an easy fix, that is not an easy diagnosis. That's something that it takes a long time. You got to go through and kind of take a look at everything. So other than any obvious visible damage, I don't know if I'd offer any advice other than try to take a look at it. But hopefully the seller insured it so nobody loses any money out of this. Hopefully it was just a silly thing damaged in shipping, but and hopefully they provided proof that it was working before it shipped, so they're not ripping you or the post office off. But that's eBay culture. That's not your question, I guess. So now, unfortunately, it sounds like you did all the things that I would have done, and I at that point, I just don't have the time to sit there and troubleshoot stuff like this. So if I've done everything that you already did, I would just ask for a refund. So sorry. Matthew Underwood followed up on his whole journey of trying to use classic consoles on VGA monitors, like in the recent video. And he kind of laid out everything that we'd been talking about and doesn't seem to be having good luck with it. So there's a few things that I could add at the moment, but I'm wondering if there's just bad luck involved here. But so first of all, if you're only using composite video, you're going to get weird blurring on everything. It's never going to look perfect because composite video is a super noisy signal, and if you're using it on a CRT, that'll get masked a lot. However, on a flat panel, you're always going to see blurring and weirdness on it. Maybe not to the extent that you showed in your pictures. So if possible, try a different power cable and power supply. I've powered the RetroTINK off of a battery powered, I think I use this thing right here, just one of these cheap $5 Anchor power supplies. I've powered it off of this often, and it works just as good as when I power it off of a high quality PSU. But you never know. Maybe you bought one at a power supply at a gas station for $1, forgot that that's the one that you bought because it probably looks just like a cell phone adapter. You never know. I would just change the power cable and power adapter just for the heck of it, just to see if that makes a difference. And if nothing else, it's a very cheap investment, even if you haven't bought it yet. I use them here, the Power Plus adapters. I mean, you could use these to charge anything, and they're $15 on Amazon. So that's an investment that pays for itself because you never know what other devices you're going to use it on, but you probably have another charger that you could use anyway. So I would just start with that. As for all the other problems, that's all very, very strange, like the flickering across the screen. While I only showed one monitor in that video, I've tested this on a ton of different devices, including multi-format PVMs, random old Dell monitors I got for free, or I think I bought one for $20 once, where the plastic was all yellowed, but it had barely been used, so the tube was nice and fresh. I think Carsey still has that one, and it might just be a bad luck in that you have the few monitors that are incompatible with the 720 by 480 signal, because I don't think the RetroTINK's exactly 640 by 480. Which is VGA. I think it's, or it could be the VESA timings versus TV timings. I went into that in detail in the Dreamcast video. No offense at all. I don't want to go through that again. That was very complicated, and I still don't even know if I explained it right there. So it could be a lot of different factors. And the only other thing that you could try is different monitors or different scalers. And I totally understand not wanting to drop more money on this when it might not even work. Spending $10 on a power supply that you could use for every USB device is one thing, but dropping $120 on an OSSC just to see if this could work is not something that I would recommend. That's just because what if it doesn't? Then it's kind of a waste of money. If you were planning on using stuff like that anyway, and you possibly, could find one used for cheap, fine. But I certainly wouldn't tell you to start dropping a lot more money to make this happen. The only other thing I could suggest is try, if you have any type of PC with a VGA output port, try doing direct 640 by 480 into it and see how it works. And if it works fine and you don't have any of the other issues, I mean, if you have the same issues, then it's your monitor. But if you don't have any of the other issues, then try setting your PC to 720 by 480 and see if that happens, see if the same stuff happens. But this is a rough one, and so I'm sorry I can't give much more advice other than a few extra tips, but this could very easily turn into something you sink a lot of money into and it still doesn't quite work right because you're working with old technology and stuff. So good luck to you. Joe Paley says, after your interview with Kurt, I'm intrigued with the idea of buying a brand new retro gaming CRT. Would any of his models be a good fit? How might they compare to a PVM? Well, I kind of described it before when I was talking about it. So just in case you were like doing something else and didn't catch that part, half listening, like sometimes I do with podcasts, the short version is that it's probably going to look more like a perfectly calibrated brand new consumer grade TV, not so much like a super high line count PVM. And Kurt's working on seeing if he could come up with a SKU for retro gamers that people could just go on his website and buy it. But once again, it's going to be ridiculously expensive because it has to be. There's no way you could hand make something like this out of parts in a factory and not have it be super expensive. The only reason CRTs or any TVs at all are as cheap as they were is because there's billion-dollar factories just, churning out hundreds of thousands of these things at a time. So just, prepare yourself for a big price tag. David Sobel just watched my GBS video and wants to know how I'd set up using the PlayStation 2 if they wanted to use both the OSSC and the GBS for deinterlacing. I thought about this. This is my second time answering the question because I didn't like my first answer. And I think the most efficient way might actually be getting a set of HD Retrovision component video cables, the pass-throughs, not the converters, and then going into the GBS, and then going out of the GBS into the OSSC's VGA input. Normally, I wouldn't recommend that, but the GBS has filtering on it, so you don't have to worry about the fact that the VGA input is missing the low-pass filter. And I would set your GBS to pass-through mode if you're using 240p or 480p games. And then if you go into 480i, I would have it to motion adaptive deinterlace. So like I was talking about before, you'd want to log in with your phone and have that control over it. And that way, if you wanted to do it that way, the OSSC would essentially in pass-through mode treat 240p and 480p through like you would expect. And then if you once you turn on the motion adaptive deinterlacing, the OSSC just thinks it's 480p, and then you could add scan lines, double to 960p, however you would normally do it then. Or I guess just pass it through is another option. So I think that would be the most efficient thing because you wouldn't ever have to switch cables. You would just have to switch inputs. The only other thing you could do is if you wanted to stay with that SCART switch so you don't even switch inputs, is on the output side of the GBS, just have a passive sync combiner built so you just go from VGA to SCART. I think there's a few solutions out there. There's definitely a few in the works that are trying to make it easier, but then you could automate the whole thing and you would never need to switch inputs. You would just need to switch the GBS control between pass-through and motion adaptive deinterlacing. And to be honest, I don't know how it would work otherwise. Maybe you could set it, I don't know. It would be cool if there was a way to set it so that if the GBS already had or detected a 240p or 480p image, it just passed it through. But if it detects 480i, motion adaptive deinterlaces to 480p. I don't know. Mess with it and see. But at the very least, it is possible to keep everything totally automated, turn the GBS into a pass-through device, and then just activate it on your phone whenever you need that deinterlacing. So hopefully I pointed you in the right direction, but that's kind of a cool idea. Obed Samuel is following up on the last post regarding the ultrasonic cleaner. They usually dry the board first using compressed air, then accelerate the drying process using a heat gun for a few minutes. I then leave the console to air dry for 24 hours. This has worked so far, but not sure if this is the best practice. I know some people have suggested submerging it in IPA to displace any trapped water before drying, but I suspect you'd go through a lot of bottles doing that. Either way, I think a cautious approach when drying is definitely advised. My only thoughts on that is as long as you know what you're doing, cool. It's very easy to take a heat gun and hold it too long in a spot and hurt a component or something like that. But if you know what you're doing, compressed air and then, just running it over with a heat gun seems fine. Also, I had a few people reach out with their opinions on this after the Q&A aired last week, which is actually kind of cool that they're airing on time now, but I'll get back to that later. The only thing that I would add is people have said submerging it in IPA is what they do afterwards just to make sure. But if you're using purified water, so distilled water, ionized water, whatever it is that there's already no impurities in it at all, I don't think you would have to worry. Now, please don't take this as indisputable fact. This is lucky guess, we'll call this. I always want to make it clear when I'm guessing and when I actually have done the research and know something. But I was under the impression that the only thing you have to worry about submerging something in water, assuming it's not plugged in, is the impurities in it. It's not the H2O itself, it's everything else. And if you're using purified water, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, I guess if you're using the same water to clean a bunch of boards, there is potential, and then dipping it in IPA might work, but I don't know. That's a really good thing, and if I ever have the space to do any of this, I am absolutely going to purchase one of these and worry about and really mess with all of this, and possibly even talk to experts and probably a biochemist would probably be up on the list of people to talk to for this, and possibly even look at stuff under a microscope and maybe create a control environment just to see how it works. So that's an awesome idea. Just whatever you do, don't throw your boards into a dishwasher. Throw like your little dishwashing detergent bulb in there, and and expect that to be good. That's no good could come of that. A question from Zabernaki. Hopefully I got that right. They're curious on my stance on high-quality SCART cables versus HD RetroVision cables. They have a mix, but have seen some folks pushing for component cables for all. The only suggestion I have to go one way or the other is what works best for your setup. That's really it. A lot of people complain about SCART because you have to worry about sync. Do I have the right one? Where did I buy my cable from? Was it made correctly when I bought it? Will my devices be compatible? Do I need a thing? And if you're just getting started in all this and you don't own a single piece of equipment, a lot of people think just going with the component cables are easier, especially if the consoles that you want to use already have HD RetroVision cables available for them. So that's probably why you hear people pushing for component video in that scenario, because if you have a Super Nintendo, a PlayStation 2, a Sega Genesis, and a Saturn, and those are all your consoles, you could just get HD RetroVisions for those, plug them into a component switch, and you never have to worry about anything ever. Alternatively, if you're trying to start from scratch with a setup, if you buy all of your cables now from reputable manufacturers, you don't have to worry about any of them being built in, with the wrong components. I hear reports of occasional like DOA stuff, but that's different. It's not, you'll know right away if it's not working. You won't slowly harm a console by doing it or anything like that. They're all built with the proper components now. And if you're using the different types of monitors and stuff, you're going to know compatibility right away. So, OSSC compatible with everything. The RetroTINKs obviously have the models that are compatible with different ones. But as far as actual picture and audio quality goes, as long as the cables are well made, you're never going to be able to see a difference in either one. So I would only concentrate on what's easiest for your setup. And if you have a mix of both already and you're making that work, I wouldn't swap anything else out at all. The only thing I have done in the past, or I guess recommended when I've been helping people set up their home setups, is that if they have a bunch of consoles and, they have an 8-port G SCART switch and an 8-port G comp switch, and the SCART switch is already filling up, That's the only time I would say, hey, if you're only using 5 inputs on the component switch and you have 7 already used on the SCART switch, maybe grab an HD Retrovision for something else, just to space things out so you have more room on both switches. But once again, it's a workflow thing. That's not quality or anything like that. So if your setup's working, I wouldn't change a thing because they're all good quality cables. Danger Renegade said they've recently been attempting to get the best possible picture they can on a GameCube, Saturn, and PS1. I'm currently set up with a Carby for GameCube and a Rad2X for Saturn and PS1. They're outputting to an M Classic, but the images appear slightly blurry. If I remove the M Classic from the equation, the two TVs seem to be terrible at 480p and the image is even worse. All 720p, 1080p native content on other systems look crystal clear on these panels. I know there's an OSSC Pro on the horizon, which may or may not be amazing for their use case, but is there anything else in the market that can accomplish no-lag upscaling while retaining the original sharpness I'm looking for? So for PlayStation 1, definitely the PS1 Digital that's coming out. You're going to have to pay a modder to install it because it's pretty complicated, but if you're really chasing the sharpest pixels, there's no other way to go. As I talked about before, especially when you have to worry about custom settings and all that stuff. There is not anything like that for the Saturn, so you could try switching to an open source scan converter, which the M Classic is not compatible with. You will get sharper pixels though. I'm kind of interested to see why you're using an M Classic though, because their smoothing option, I think, does a really great job with 720p and a good, okay job on 480p, but the classic scaling, I've never noticed a difference on that. And I'm not just saying like, I'm comparing it to my OSSC with custom profiles on my OLED. I mean, even just going into my cheap LG TV versus a Rad2X, I've rarely seen a noticeable difference on both, especially because on something like a Saturn, that's early 3D graphics. So those are never going to look perfect, really. They're always either going to be super sharp and blocky or kind of smooth and blurry, which is why I loved the smoothing effect of the RetroTINK Rad2X products. So kind of interested in your own opinion on that. But yeah, for PS1, definitely get the PS1 Digital if that's what you're chasing. For Saturn, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I really was pleased with how the Saturn looked with the smoothing filter on without the M Classic. I thought it did a good enough job making the blocky graphics look okay, and I actually thought the smooth 480p scaling of my TV did a good job as well, whereas on 2D content, I want it super sharp, but on the 3D stuff, it kind of made it feel a little bit more like a CRT, but that's preference. There is no right answer for that. There is no right answer for the M Classic. I already proved it doesn't add lag, so feel free to use it to your heart's content. I'm just answering the sharpness questions for you. The other thing you could do, like I talked about before, is pick up an OSSC and try to get the perfect profiles for Saturn and PS1 on there. But once again, you're going to have to be switching profiles every time a game switches resolutions, and then you're going to have to know what resolution every game runs in. So I guess for your current setup, Carby's perfect for now. There's nothing else in the market that's going to beat it. PS1 Digital is going to be the best way to get that. And I will also be testing that with the M Classic in the review just because everybody always asks me to. And Saturn's going to be the only tricky one. Try a bunch of different scenarios and see what works best for you. But I really think, turn on that smoothing filter, turn off the M Classic, and see how you feel that looks, because it might be good enough. And of course, try different combinations. Try both modes of the M Classic, try both modes of the Rad2X, and see if that'll do it for you. But unless you're really into tinkering, I would try to learn to love the Rad2X for now, because moving to the OSSC with that, it's going to be good. It's going to be very good, but it's not going to work with the M Classic. And if you want perfect output, you're going to have to always mess with it. Brento wanted my recommendation on a specific power supply, and I'm going to have to very respectfully not comment on this because I've many times over the years heard people tell me, oh, these power supplies are awesome, get one from this seller, and I get it home and it's there's no UL certification on it. It looks kind of junky, and I put it on a scope, or I put it on the multimeter under load, and I'm like, I don't know if I would trust this one. And they send pictures of theirs, and it's not the exact same one. And then what if it's really good, but the next run of production people make isn't the same? Like, power supplies are kind of scary to recommend, and it's really hard to do diligence on that. And even the ones from the giant manufacturers like Triad and Power Plus, I mean, they make an insane amount of power supplies, and even they are changing their lineups now and then, both to regulations, part availability, and all that stuff. So it's just impossible to comment on power supplies other than OEM. The only advice I feel very comfortable giving is, use original OEM stuff if you can, recap it if it's not working, especially the internal power supplies. And if you need an external one, the Triad ones for now seem to be the best by far, but I can't promise what their next run of production is going to be. And while a small company might make runs of 1,000, 5,000, Triad's probably making them in runs of 10,000, 100,000. So it's really tricky to make any kind of recommendation on that at all. So respectfully, I just, even if I had the time and the knowledge to dig deep and test a certain power supply brand, I probably wouldn't, just because I'm not an expert in that, and I can't guarantee the supply chain unless I stayed in touch with the company or something. So sorry to let you down on that one. I would rather be cautious than give bad advice. James Bonner says they're looking to manage all of their connections to the PVM for all 43 of their consoles. Most are either RGB modded or S-Video modded due to no RGB solution. They've used a G-SCART switch for years and switched between sources for S-Video, but I've recently purchased a Sony-powered S-Video auto switcher, but it started messing with Sync-on Luma systems on RGB since they share their sync line, and I have to unplug the S-Video cable. This does not happen with my mechanical Sony S-Video switch. Can you recommend an S-Video to RGB SCART converter to add to my consoles to the G-SCART switch and simplify the setup? So that's a really complicated setup. 43 consoles. I would really step back and think of the whole setup chain for this. How many SCART consoles do you have? How many S-Video, how many component video consoles do you have? Is there one? Can you combine this to two switches instead of one? To answer your question directly, there is no S-Video to SCART converter out there yet, but there is at least one that's readily available that I know of that's built by and for retro gaming. But there is the Koryu, the S-Video to component video switch. So maybe if you have a Sony auto switcher, you could go into the Koryu and then into a G-Comp switch. The latest firmware of the Koryu, I could be wrong about this, but I think the latest firmware turns off the output when no input signal is detected, meaning as long as your S-Video console's off, it won't trigger that input on the G-Comp switch. But that's 16, and you're saying you have 43, so maybe getting the 32 input crosspoint or a couple of the 24s might be the better option for you, and then just plug everything into those. Because, as long as you check your model, you should be able to run composite S-Video, component video, and RGB. So maybe two of those would take care of everything. And I don't know if it's auto switching, but it certainly is, one button push versus unplugging any cables. So that's a pretty crazy setup. That's pretty awesome, actually. So, maybe elaborate a little bit more and I could see how I could help, but that's a bit overwhelming. That's pretty awesome. Well, that's it for this week, and it looks like perfect timing because I'm hearing the compressor start up across the street. I think they're going to start the jackhammering soon, so this all worked out nicely. I do have a question for all of you, though. I've been posting these live to everybody at the same time. Is that cool? Does anybody have an issue with that? Any reasons why I should or shouldn't? You're all often very much smarter than me with this stuff and have a perspective on it that I don't see, but I just thought it worked out pretty neat that I could make this live to everybody at the same day, or at the same time, but still make it kind of a cool supporter only thing where I get to interact with all of you. So would definitely love your thoughts on that. And if you're new to all of this, ask any question you have at all wherever it is that you support in the latest support post. The way the services work, I can't go back and scroll through and figure out which comments are new or not. There is not like a comment button, so you got to just post it in the newest one. If I ever miss a question, it's most likely because it either came in after I started recording or because I accidentally deleted it in post like a moron. It happens sometimes. But other than that, I mean, while respectfully I do respond to an insane amount of comments on YouTube and social media, I don't respond to comments on these videos because this is just a thank you to everybody that supports and just to show my appreciation. So no disrespect to anybody else. I just want to keep this supporter focused, but still want everybody else to have their chance to listen to it. And it hasn't been a problem so far. So as always, thank you all so much for your support, and I'll see you next week.